Welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content, and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and today we have another top 5 list for you all. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 5 Tiny Epic games. Now, the Tiny Epic series is a line of games published by Gamelyn Games and designed by designer Scott Almes, who has designed other board games. He has other games in his resume, but he is mostly known for this series or line of games. Now, the Tiny Epic games, from a philosophy perspective, started as a gimmick of sorts, where these games were contained in very small boxes. All the components were miniature. You had small meeples, you had small wooden components, small dice, cubes, and cards to represent the game components. And at the same time, these games were not necessarily filler or light games. These were medium weight games with decent game lengths, anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, sometimes even pushing the 1 hour mark. And these games take a considerable table footprint. These games take a good portion of your table. They're not necessarily small games once you unload and unpack them. Now, these games are known for having really cool themes. Scott Almes has kind of flirted and experimented with all the different popular genres and themes that are found within the board game hobby. And although there is a certain commonality from the sense of some overlapping mechanisms and obviously a game design philosophy perspective, these games are all made by one designer and one board game publisher. At the same time, each of these games brings something new to the table. So without any further ado, let's get straight to my list. And before we move on to number 5, I will bring out an honorable mention. My number 6, I have played 8 of these Tiny Epic games, and I decided to share my top 5, but I am going to sneak in my number 6, and that is Tiny Epic Quests. And a lot of people are going to get very upset at me because this is one of the most popular games in the series, perhaps the most popular. Lots of people tend to love this. Tiny Epic Quests. First of all, I will say I do most of my Tiny Epic gaming solo. So I am kind of judging these games on the basis of their solo modes. And Tiny Epic Quests, it just seems like it would be more interesting multiplayer. I have not played it multiplayer. But from a solo perspective, it's cool. It's interesting. You're maneuvering throughout the board, and the board consists of kind of like a cross-like shape of grid of modular cards that you use to make the board each time, or to make the map each time. And it's really cool because players are always choosing from 2 options as far as movement is concerned. You could either move in a straight line horizontally or vertically. You can maybe move a space diagonally to the next quadrant diagonally, or you can take a raft and go to any one of the edges on the board. So you're making these decisions ultimately to make it to different spots on the board where you're either going to be combating goblins, or you're going to be trying to learn spells, or you're going to be trying to advance and progress your way through different temples. And this is all done in the efforts to complete different quests. As the name says, there's a bunch of face-up quest cards always available for players to try to accomplish. And these are basically ways of earning victory points, because the quests combined with the number of goblins you kill throughout the game are going to combine and total up to be your victory points. That and how many spells I think you learn throughout the game. So there's a lot going on, a lot of different moving pieces. This game does again, like I said, seem like it'll be more interesting in multiplayer, because perhaps different players will be racing to make it to different parts on the board and try to complete the quest. The solo variant does accommodate for that by leaving the quest there on a temporary basis. So if you cannot fulfill a quest quick enough, it's removed and a new one replaces it. So it always keeps you on your toes and the edge of your seat, trying to accomplish these quests as quick as possible. It is a fun game. I enjoy it, but compared to the other 5 games that are higher on this list, it's not quite as good as those. So that's why it's my number 6 Tiny Epic game, Tiny Epic Quest. And now we move on to my number 5, the top 5 proper, the real cream of the crop for this list. And my number 5 is Tiny Epic Tactics, and this is the most recent one for me. And when it comes to gimmicks, this one has perhaps the coolest gimmick of all the Tiny Epic games, even the ones I have yet to play, because basically you open up the box, and the box itself serves as part of the board. First of all, you unroll this little mat here, and this is the foundation of your board. This is like the lowest level of your land, and you see different land spaces and castle spaces, and you see different river and water spaces. And inside the box, you have, well, first of all, you have the box itself, the back cover of the box, which is actually more terrain, and it's three-dimensional, so it's kind of like an elevated terrain. So your character is going to have to mount and climb up these elevated terrains to get there, and that's going to cost more movement. And inside that box are a bunch of these smaller boxes of different dimensions and different shapes, and these all go on top of the play mat and on top of the other terrains in different ways. And basically, it gives a really cool, neat, three-dimensional presentation within this small, tiny, epic box. And this is another fantasy-themed game. This is kind of the genre that's most repeated in Gamelyn is the fantasy theme. It started with Tiny Epic Kingdoms, and there's a bunch of other fantasy-themed games, including Quest, which I just finished mentioning. And players take on the role of a team of heroes. So you're controlling 4 different characters, and you have 4 different classes. You have your fighter, you have your rogue, you have your wizard, and you have a monster or a beast in your control. And they all come with their different health stats, their different ammunition stats, their different magic or mana pools. They each come with their different special abilities, the different amounts of damage that they assign to characters when they hit them, their melee attacks, their range attacks, their spells. Really, really cool, and there's a good variety of characters within each of those 4 classes that I mentioned. This game could be played competitively, it could be played cooperatively, so that's something that I very much appreciate. And it comes with a really good, cool, competent solo module where players are, instead of trying to control particular spots on the board, which is the objective in the main game or in the competitive multiplayer game, in the solo game, players are trying to complete a series of quests where they have to go into the dungeons and find these gems. And what happens in the solo game is that these boxes here, you flip them over when you make it inside one of their entrances, and all of a sudden it reveals a dungeon within. And it's kind of like a maze where you work your way from the start of the dungeon all the way to the end of the dungeon, where you can find the crystal that you need in order to complete your objective. You need to complete or find 6 crystals, and the crystal of glory, the final crystal, needs to be the last one you discover. And each of these crystals trigger a special ability right then and there when you trigger it, when you capture it. But in the meantime, navigating these dungeons, there's a bunch of different threats. You have random beasts and traps and cave-ins. You have specific spots that only one of the 4 different classes can enter. And again, you're moving through this very much maze-like style. So I think that's a really cool feature of the game. In the competitive way, you don't even do this. You don't even factor that in. Instead, the objective is kind of like a capture the flag type of objective where you're trying to get your players to take control or take majorities in particular spots within the board, which is really cool itself, but I prefer the solo or cooperative way of playing this game. Really cool. Again, lots of content and variety. There's an expansion a small little box that actually adds different terrain features so that you could basically have a different board setup for the games that you play. Really cool. My number 5 Tiny Epic game of all time, Tiny Epic Tactics. And now we move on to my number 4 Tiny Epic game of all time, and that is Tiny Epic Zombies. And this game here edges out Tiny Epic Tactics for a few reasons. I find that its cooperative or solo mode is just a little bit simpler to get into, a little bit less convoluted. The setup is a little bit easier because you don't have to worry about all those 3-dimensional pieces. So again, from a streamlined perspective, it's a little bit simpler. I do like the fantasy theme more than I like the zombie theme, but I do enjoy how it's implemented here. It's really cool because this game, you could play it competitively and cooperatively as well as Tiny Epic Tactics. So I like that it offers all those different features. You can play it solo mode, and even more interesting, you can play one versus all. So where one player controls the zombies and all all the other players around the table control the heroes or the good guys, the survivors who are trying to defeat and or escape from the zombies. So I find that additional element or that additional way or mode of play to be very interesting. I like this game because basically players are trying to accomplish 3 different objectives, and they're trying to accomplish them in a particular order in order to win the game. But there's so many objectives to choose from, so from game to game it's going to be different. Also, the rooms that make up the mall, the board, it consists of a map of a mall. All of the rooms are double-sided and they're modular, so they could end up randomly in a different configuration and on a different side of itself, so it represents a different room. So the mall's always going to look a little bit different. I find that to be really cool. I like the different weapons that players are trying to scavenge for, the different items that they're trying to, you know, gather up from the different rooms in the mall, and how all the different objectives kind of tie in together. Each player has a specific character, and that character gives them a unique ability. But on the reverse side, that character is a zombie character that you will be combating against, whether you're playing cooperatively or 1 versus all. And I believe with the 1 versus all mode, as players get eliminated from the game, this game does have player elimination when you play multiplayer. As players get eliminated, the heroes can be flipped over and turned into additional bad guys, so that the overlord has additional abilities available to him or to her against the heroes or the survivors. Really cool. It plays out really fun. My number 4, Tiny Epic game of all time, Tiny Epic Zombies. And now we move on to my number 3, and my number 3 is Tiny Epic Defenders. And this is another fantasy theme, and this is definitely the theme that Gamelyn returns to the most. You have lots of fantasy themed games. It started all with fantasy theme with Tiny Epic Kingdoms, and again we got Tiny Epic Quest, Tactics, and here Defenders. Defenders is my favorite of the fantasy themed Tiny Epic games. It's a purely cooperative game, which I like. I like that. And basically players are trying to defend their capital city from the onslaught of different monsters, and ultimately the big boss, the big bad guy. That's always a secret until the very end of the game. He remains secret. And it's cool because there's 5 different bosses to choose from randomly. And there's a bunch of different characters. You got elves and dwarves and all these different classes and all these different races to pick from. And each of these characters has a unique ability. And you're moving throughout the board, which consists of different terrain features that surround the capital. You have the forests, and you have the desert, and you have the mountains, and each of these locations has a specific location unique action that could be triggered when you go there. But the players have other actions to choose from, including lowering the threat on all of these different regions, because each of these regions has a certain threshold of threat that they can meet or they can sustain as these different enemies and monsters and bad guys attack them. And once they surpass that threshold, those regions are permanently destroyed from the game. And that means that your capital is more susceptible, because now when those regions get attacked, instead of that threat or damage being applied to those regions, they're going to be applied to the capital. And once your capital is destroyed, once its threat level goes to the maximum capacity, then the players have lost the game. However, what the players are trying to do is they're trying to fight back, you know, that challenge there, at least hold it back as much as possible. There's going to be casualties. Certain regions are going to be burned. They're going to be destroyed and ravaged, but you want to hold it back as much as possible until you're finally able to defeat those big bads, the overlord bosses at the end of the game. If the players can jointly defeat that big boss, that bad guy, the overlord, before the capital city is destroyed, then the players have won the game. Really cool. Lots of characters to choose from. As I said, lots of bosses to choose from. This actually comes with an expansion, the Dark War expansion. I do own it, but I have not played it yet. But I'm just enjoying so much the content that's offered here. Such a simple game design. It's probably the most simple, streamlined of all of these games, the easiest one to teach. If you're gonna pick a gateway Tiny Epic game for the purposes of introducing the series to someone who perhaps is a more casual gamer, prefers light games, or is perhaps intimidated by rules-heavy games. Not that any of the Tiny Epic games are rules-heavy, but if you really want to find a light, streamlined Tiny Epic game, Tiny Epic Defenders is the way to go. My number 3 Tiny Epic game, Tiny Epic Defenders. And now we move on to my number 2, and my number 2, Not as popular as some of these games, but it's my number 2, and it really contended for number 1, and that's Tiny Epic Western. First of all, I'm a big fan of the Wild West theme, the old Western theme, with the gunslinging and all that revolves around the romanticized Old West. And I really think this game is cool because basically the board consists of these 6 different buildings, and these are the typical buildings you find in Wild West games. You've got the saloon, you've got the town hall, you got the sheriff's office, you got the bank, you got all these buildings, and all these buildings basically have these different worker placement spots. This is a worker placement game. As a matter of fact, it's the most Euro out of all these Tiny Epic Western games, although it does have a little bit of some Ameritrash with lots of attack and dice rolling taking place in this game as well. But this game, as I mentioned, has worker placement, and another thing it has a really cool majority stock market feel to it, because players are partaking in a little bit of city building, where you're going to these different spots. You're playing poker. You're playing one-hand poker, or three-hand poker, I should say, because all of these buildings are surrounded by 2 cards, and you have 1 card in your hand, and that 1 card combined with the 2 cards in the building will make up your poker hand at that particular building. So you're trying to compete in these different buildings to have the best poker hand in 3-hand poker, because you will win additional rewards if you win the poker hand in some of these buildings, which will come in the form of different resources. There's 3 different resources to balance in this game. You've got your law, you've got your power, and you've got your gold. And these are the different resources that you're going to use to buy the buildings to add to your particular part of town. And these buildings add additional worker placement spots, and they also add intrinsic victory points, anywhere from 1 to 4 victory points for you at the end of the game. And they also add these symbols in one of the 3 different industries in this game. You've got transportation, you've got mining, and a third industry that I can't remember right now. So you got these 3 different industries, and each of the cards has symbols in 1 or more of these industries. And each symbol that you have in your cards, in your combined or collective sum of cards, each of those symbols represents a share basically that you have in that stock. And as the game progresses, players are manipulating to make some industries more valuable than others. So the most valuable industry is going to give you more victory points for the leader at the end of the game than the second most valuable industry, and then the third most valuable industry. So it's a combination of trying to manipulate that stock market by making these industries more valuable, and at the same time getting the right combination of symbols in your different building cards that you're purchasing throughout the game so that you can compete in those different industries accordingly. Really, really cool. At the same time, every time you go to a worker placement spot that already has an opponent there, you can have a duel, and you will roll some dice, and the winner of the duel will be the player who finishes in that spot and actually triggers that worker placement's action. Really, really cool. Probably the most convoluted of all of these games, which might be a good reason why it's not more popular. But again, between the worker placement, the stock market, the ability to duel and attack for these worker placement spots, the different characters that players are controlling with their different special powers, and again, all the different Wild West flavors spread throughout this game, I can't help but really enjoy it. My number 2 Tiny Epic game of all time, Tiny Epic Westerns. And that's it, folks. Time for my number 1. And my number 1 is Tiny Epic Galaxies. And this is basically the 4X rendition of the Tiny Epic series. This is a space exploration game in a very small sense, where players are trying to colonize these different planets and sometimes touch down on them to get temporary benefits from them. And these different planets all come in different sizes and different amount of victory points that they give the players who are able to colonize them. Not only that, but each planet has a special power that when it's in the main lineup, a player can touch down to trigger it 1 time, or if they gain it and add it to their colony, then in future rounds they could potentially trigger those special powers of that planet more consistently. It's a really cool game because this is a dice rolling game, and it's a roll and lock game where players are actually not roll and lock. I'm sorry. It's kind of Yahtzee style to a degree. Players are rolling dice, and then they get one free reroll, and then they assign those dice to different actions. You could use them to land a ship of yours onto the colony track of a planet, or to touch down on a planet to trigger its one-time ability. Or you can use it to gain different resources. You got culture and you got energy as resources. Or you can use it to trigger your galaxy-specific special abilities. So you can use all these different dice. And your energy is very helpful because your energy is a resource that you could use not only to upgrade your empire, which will give you victory points, make you more powerful, unlock ships for you, unlock more dice for you to roll in future turns, but your energy can also be used as a resource for rerolls. So although you only get one free reroll per turn, potentially you can have more free rerolls if you are able to use your energy in order to do so. You also have your culture resource, which you can use on another player's turn to piggyback on their action. So let's say you have some culture, somebody triggers an ability that you're having a hard time activating on your own, but they rolled it. You can pay one culture in order to piggyback on their action and do it on their turn. Lots of really cool, neat things going on. The solo mode here is very well made because the game actually comes with 5 different levels of difficulty, and each of those levels are represented by their own artificial intelligence, their own AI opponent. So you've got a super duper easy opponent, and you've got a super hard opponent, and then you've got 3 levels in between. So basically, according to how you feel you are ready, what you feel, the level you feel you're currently on, you determine which AI opponent you want to face. Right now, I am doing medium. I'm in the middle of the pack. I'm a little too good for those 2 lower difficulty levels, but I'm not quite good enough, or at least I don't feel like I am, to challenge those 2 higher levels. But really fun, quick game, plays well solo, plays well multiplayer, because when you play multiplayer, you add some mission cards, secret mission cards. Every player gets 1 secret mission, which scores them points in ways that nobody around the table knows. So you have your visible points that players can calculate, they can see, and then you have your hidden mission that you reveal at the end of the game and be like, aha! You thought I lost, but I won after all. Really cool game. My number 1 tiny epic game of all time, Tiny Epic Galaxies. And that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for joining us here at When Harry Met Board Games. Please comment down below and tell me which Tiny Epic game is your favorite game. Perhaps it's a game that I failed to mention. Perhaps it's a game that I had lower on the list than you think it deserves. Perhaps you haven't played Tiny Epic Games, but you are curious and would like to explore and find out which Tiny Epic Games is the right one for you. Hopefully this video helps you out with that. Please comment down below. I'm interested in reading what you guys have to say. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.